right, good evening. I'm Faye D'Souza. Thank you for joining us. We're having more conversations about Karnataka's Hijab Ban. I'll give you a quick update of what's happening or what's played out today. The Karnataka High Court bench, headed by the Chief Justice of the Karnataka High Court, has begun hearing the petitions. Remember, the petitions were passed on to a bench and has adjourned the matter until Monday next week, which is the 14th of February. But the judge made an observation in court saying that we restrain anyone from adopting religious practices on campus while we're hearing the matter, which basically means that until the order comes from the court, they would prefer it if nobody wore any religious attire. Now, this was strongly argued against by the petitioner's lawyers, who said that what you're doing effectively is temporarily suspending our rights and our faith, which is unconstitutional. But from what we understood, this is not a written order. This is just a verbal observation made by the court. So we'll have to figure out how this actually plays out. The Supreme Court, Kapil Sibal brought the matter before the Supreme Court as well and asked for a 9-judge bench to adjudicate. But the Chief Justice of India has said that the High Court decide first and then we'll decide. So that's what's happened there. In the meantime, where you know that the schools and colleges are waiting for the High Court's order in order to decide what to do, and these girls have been denied an education in the meantime. The Karnataka government is going to also wait until the High Court gives its judgment. So this is where we are right now. The questions are still sort of burning across the country. Is this a violation of rights of these young women? Is this discrimination of these young people? Is it gender-based, religious-based discrimination? And what impact will that have on their lives going forward? And in the argument of, let's keep everything uniform inside of school, and our constitution allows us to practice and profess our religion and basically have religious expression, have freedom of expression as well, have right to education as well. Which of these two things is more important? These are the questions we're going to attempt to ask and answer, which means that if you have a question, you can leave it in the chat window. Joining me this evening is Maryam, who's a lawyer, who's been kind enough to give us her time. Dr. Ruksheda, Syeda, who's a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist, who's going to talk about the impact this will have on the minds of these young people, both the boys and the girls, given what we're doing. And consider the fact that this is starting to spread across the country as well. So it's no longer just... unfortunately, it's no longer just South Karnataka, my hometown of Mangalore and Chikmagalur, where this is happening. Is now starting to spread across the country. We'll also have Karuna, Nundy, who's an advocate with the Supreme Court, join us through the course of the conversation. So this is where we are right now. If I may please start with Ms. Alavi, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Is this, and at the end of the day, when we talk about Article 25, which is the fundamental right to practice my religion, one of the arguments that comes up is it depends on whether this is essential to being a Muslim. Do you see that argument as fair?
See, fair. The argument is not just unfair; it's also very, very convoluted and quite out of context from its very genesis. The courts are constitutional courts. All courts, they have to decide within the four corners of the law, and religion does not come under the four corners of law. So you have the Supreme Court's order on Bijoy Emmanuel, which is, you have the High Courts saying this and that, but you have the Supreme Court's order saying that even though religious practices may sound bizarre, they may sound illogical or whatever, what have you, it's not the court's business to go and interpret religious texts on the first part. And second part, as long as public order, morality, health are not being threatened, people should be allowed to profess what they want.
May I just bring in one thing? But I remember a very similar argument being made during the Sabarimala judgment, saying that, this is internal to the religion. Why is the court actually coming in at this point and making a decision on Sabarimala? But it was argued that the court makes decisions on many matters, that it is not an expert on.
They did the same thing for triple talaq as well, but you have to understand that with the triple talaq, they went into interpretation of ahadith and all also, which is deeply disturbing because, the belief at the base of religion is not something that a court can decide. I mean, they are apples and oranges. And having said that, if you see the Sabrimala judgment, you can have all the judgments in the world saying, women have equal rights, this, that, the other. But when it comes to practicing the month of Riksham, where men, they will wear all the black clothes, they will have those things. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact term, so I won't use any word. They will walk barefoot. I'm from the legal fraternity, so I have seen lawyers do it, judges do it. They practice it in their daily lives. A big part of which is that they will not even look at you if you're a woman, if you identify as a woman, when they are in that state of worship for 41 days. So for 41 days, my colleagues and classmates will not look at me in the face when I'm talking, and they have the full right to it. So you can have women entering the Sabrimala judgment, but Lord Ayappa's devotees will devote 41 days to not looking at women. So, I mean, you can argue that this is deeply segregacious and this and that, but there is no logic to religious practices at the end of the day. It is belief that has the ruling hand there.
Okay, so let me then just stretch this argument a little bit, because now it's before the courts, whether we like it or not. The courts are going to weigh in. We've got the High Court, the Supreme Court also weighing in today. There are two laws here. One is my fundamental, or these young girls' fundamental rights to equality, to religion, to speech and expression, to education. All of these things have come into play, and we can talk about that, separately. The other law that we're looking at is the Karnataka state law, which allows it a certain power to say that clothes that will disturb order will not be allowed. Which of these two is a stronger law, which is likely to take precedence in this? Because they have to choose one and the other, right?
See, first of all, laws are made and broken all the time. The education institutions have a right to formulate the laws or the rules that they want, but they can't be violative of guaranteed constitutional rights. They have to be tested time and again.
Yes.
And having said that, even if right to religion, oh, hi, Karuna ma'am.
Hello, hi.
So even if sorry, it's a fangirl moment for me.
No,
so even if you say that there's the right to the right to practice religion is a relative right, it is still a guaranteed right. And to put girls in a difficult position where they either choose their faith or they choose their education is deeply disturbing to me.
Let me just take that same question that I asked you to Karuna Nundy, because she's here. Good evening, Ms. Nundy. Thank you for joining us. The question that we were talking about is the fact that the court is now going to weigh in on a religious matter, which we've seen happen before. We've seen it happen on triple talaq. We've seen it happen on, the Sabrimala case, where every time people say that the court has no business, weighing in on something that's religious because it's not logical, and hence you can't apply logic to it. But it's going to happen. And do you think that the argument here, which is where I started with essential practice, which is these girls, it becomes a fundamental right only if it is essential to you being a Muslim that you need to wear that hijab, which many people writing columns over the last 2 days have said no.
I think the essential practice point is an uncomfortable point, right?
Yes.
And the reason is that once you essentialize something in the law, it's very difficult to roll it back, right? And there are also lots of feminist Muslim theologians that espouse the idea of ijtihad, or the interpretation, or the progressive interpretation of Islam in accordance with changing circumstances, etc. Right? And so there are people who say that there is the I'm certainly no Quranic scholar, but I've advised the Maldives on issues of fundamental rights in the context of Islamic law. And I've presented a paper on progressive human rights in Islamic countries to the Organization of Islamic Conference. So I am familiar with the sort of general area, right? And while it is true that what the Quran says is meant to be taken as a given, as opposed to the Hadith or other texts, when, for example, you speak of 100 lashes or stoning, etc., right? What happens in more progressive Islamic jurisdictions is that the process to get to it is sort of interpreted very strictly, and therefore it becomes very difficult and almost impossible to get to that, right? I think that our courts necessarily interpret issues of religion. But as you may recall, Justice Chandrachud and Justice Nariman in these judgments have also said that this is all, the fundamental rights in the Constitution trump all religion. And they are the flaw.
Yeah.
And everything else is subject to that flaw, regardless of what the religious text says, right? Now, but the thing is, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a long answer. So while in a previous interview, and may I say, Faye, it is so wonderful and pleasant to talk to an interviewer like you, because there are people out there who just take the sort of, imagine that they are in court and prosecutors when they're really not. Bizarrely inappropriate. But anyway, and doesn't serve the substance. But the thing is that the reason that I'm a little uncomfortable with the Article 25 argument, and I have the privilege of not being in court and not having to make the argument, right? The reason I'm uncomfortable with it is because I feel that it freezes the idea of the hijab as an essential practice, right? And I think that the right of people to wear the hijab and not be barred from educational institutions is absolutely vital. And I think that that sometimes the temptation to fall back on the Article 25 argument is a little bit of flailing, because what else is available? But let's keep in mind, right, not just the Bijoy Emanuel judgment that the petitioners had cited in court, and I think quite correctly, because the Article 25 argument that is popularly considered is the one about the freedom to profess, practice, and propagate religion, right?
So, on that point, I just want to bring in something so that we can pack it into the same. Mr. Pink says, please educate me on this topic. I've been wasting a lot of time in the last few days. I haven't been able to crack it. This is what the conversation is about. We're trying to just figure out what's going on here. Ms. Nundy, today the High Court, in an observation, verbally said we would like, for as long as this case is sub judice and we're hearing the matter, we don't want anybody to wear any religious attire in schools. The lawyers arguing, Mr. Kamath and Mr. Hegde said this is a temporary suspension of our fundamental rights. How can this be possible? So coming back to what you're saying about the fact that these are fundamental rights, to temporarily suspend them is unconstitutional. So, I mean, I don't know exactly.
What troubles me most is none of this. It's the Article 14 argument, which is that you admit these students, they stay in your university, and then suddenly 2 to 3 months before the exams, you decide that they can't enter the university. I think that is absolutely unacceptable, right? And I think that
so it's a violation of their right to equality, you're saying, under Article 14.
No, I think it's the right against arbitrariness.
Okay.
And also, why does this bother all of us? We're trying to trammel and fit our arguments in the boxes of law that we have available, because the law develops by precedent. But why fundamentally does this trouble us? Because we are not in France. We are not in a jurisdiction that is a laissez-faire jurisdiction, where there is no public, where religion is kept out of the public sphere. We are in a jurisdiction where a few days ago we had the Prime Minister in orange robes worshipping, and the Ram temple is something that is, when he ascended the throne, as it were, there were sort of pujas that happened that he participated in. In such a situation, I think that the state must be called upon in this case to say, what does it mean by secularism? If they purport to say that women will not wear hijabs because it is a non-secular practice, are they willing to get rid of the various, I'm trustee of an organization and that was registered in Bangalore. And when I went to the office, there were religious iconography everywhere, right? Are you willing to crack down upon that? Are you willing to say that under the Motor Vehicles Act that Sikhs will not be, given the Punjab election coming up, are you willing to say that Sikhs will not be permitted to wear turbans? Why are you stripping Muslim women of hijabs 3 months before the exams, contrary to Article 14, contrary to Bijoy Emanuel, when you are unwilling to take a stand of what secularism means under Article 25, what secularism means under the Karnataka Education Act, more significantly, and when you have done this in a completely arbitrary manner?
I want to bring in Dr. Syeda here because this is a really important thing. We're going to talk about mental health as well, because we're talking about very young people. And the thing that has upset most of the country is the videos we have seen of these young girls being heckled by, in some cases, their classmates, in some cases, just large groups of men. The idea of consent, the idea of agency over one's body, the idea of expression of one's identity with your clothes and who you are, all of it being curtailed at this point. Dr. Syeda, what impact is this going to have? What message are we sending to young people across the country, boys and girls?
Thank you so much for the question and involving me in this discussion, because it's a very important point when we understand that, okay, if any human being is threatened, what happens to them, right? They don't realize their self, they don't realize their self-esteem gets hampered, self-confidence gets hampered, and they're not going to accomplish everything that they want to, and it also affects health. So something like this, when I am being threatened, and especially when we're talking about women universally, but also especially in India, what happens is if there's even a threat of any kind of a safety issue or concern to women, the first thing that happens is their movement and their freedom gets taken away. And that's a threat that every woman kind of like lives with, every young girl lives with all their lives, right? Where we are talking about young girls even like not being able to go to school because they have periods and because the honor is attached to them and all of that. So it's impacting all of us, the people who are, when we are talking about a bullying system in school as well, even if you're picking on one person, we talk about that the biggest victim is the person who's getting bullied, but there's also the victim who is bullying and also the other people who are witnessing. So when we are not really working with all of these people, everybody is going to get impacted and damaged in a negative manner. So we are looking at people, boys and girls both forming already having these kind of gender roles and stereotypes that we kind of are raised with, but we're also forcing women to now consider themselves as unsafe and second-class citizens. And we're saying that, okay, the boys will also kind of now consider them in that way. So we're not really looking at their development, not only just girls, but boys. Having said that, yes, we can't talk about women's rights and equalities by always talking about boys. Definitely. So we are going to also focus on women and what they need in order to be healthy. Right? So we need to be able to provide them with security and safety so that they can achieve their autonomy. This is not something, unfortunately, that women should have to fight for, but it is something that we are fighting for. And it's going to impact my health physically. It's going to impact my development neuroendocrinologically, which means that it's going to make me more prone to having mental health issues and also physical issues, which is then going to impact me in my perinatal phase. It's going to impact the fetus in my body when I get pregnant, and also the child when I give birth to that child. So it is something that is going to keep on giving, unfortunately, this kind of trauma and these kind of traumatic experiences. And we know scientifically, statistically, with evidence-based, that early childhood and early life, adulthood, negative experiences is going to have far more deleterious effects on your both physical as well as mental health than a whole lot of other environmental issues as well. So we know that this is something that should be very concerned about. Other people, other children watching this on whichever live stream or television or newspapers that they're reading, it's going to impact everyone, and it's not just going to be about these 6 girls or 100 girls or those 600 other students involved. So it's unfortunately going to impact negatively, is what I'm going to say at the end of the day.
I want to just, bring this, and we'll come back to the law with the two lawyers, but I just want to bring this into a larger scope right now. There are two sides to this argument. One is an argument that says this is about agency and choice and consent. These young women should be allowed to wear whatever they want to wear. If they want to wear the hijab, if they feel that that is what they need, they should be allowed to do it. On the other hand, we have, again, many arguments on social media and within mainstream media saying that this is oppressive, it's regressive, it targets women, it takes away their choice, and so it should be removed from the system, which is the question I'm going to bring to the two ladies on the panel who are wearing your headscarves, so that you can tell the rest of the people honestly how you feel about it. Ms. Alavi, if you're comfortable talking about it, and I won't force you, do you want to respond to this idea that this is oppressive towards these girls and so we should make them take it off, and what that sounds like to you?
I can tell you my personal journey with the hijab. So my schooling was in a convent and in a Protestant school. And then 5 years of my law degree was in Aligarh Muslim University. And throughout, I never wore the hijab. I started wearing at the age of 25.
Okay.
By that time, I had already had my farewell pictures in, long hair and saris and everything. And then I was running around begging everyone that, listen, I've started wearing the hijab now. Please take my pictures down. So that's where I come from.
May I ask why you decided to start wearing it at 25?
For me, it is a spiritual act. It simply makes me feel more closer to my God.
Okay.
That's it. And the state has no business telling me whether or not I can put a cloth on my head, which is the first problematic thing. It's not about practice of religion. It's also about my private thoughts with my maker. And the state has no place there. Secondly, the state cannot be blowing hot and cold on its own students. You allowed them to attend classes throughout the year. Their ID cards have the hijab. They were doing everything like any normal student would. And then suddenly you just pull the plug on their education. So what you're seeing, that there are girls standing outside the school gate, begging to be let in, begging to just do what any child of their age is doing. And you're telling them, no, your hair has to be visible. Tell me, how is that an essential function of the state? That no, you must show your hair if you want an education. Even if I was not wearing the hijab, I would have gone and worn it right now, just in protest and in solidarity. So much for patriarchy. Now, I don't discount the journey of people for whom it doesn't mean the same thing. And that's fair. But at the end of the day, it is a personal choice. I will follow my interpretation of my religion. And even if it is declared as an essential religious practice, is the state going to knock on your doors and saying, oh my God, it's an essential, constitutionally essential practice. Why are you not covering your head? Do they do it for namaz? Do they do it for Hajj? Do they test for rozas? Really? I mean, it's hilarious at this point. We are ignoring the fact that there is I don't want to use the word agenda, but I can't think of anything else right now.
I'll do it if you like.
No, there is a narrative. Okay, fine. There is a narrative that, okay, this is the progressive standard. And this is the only progressive standard. And if you don't match up to it, you're the enemy. You deserve to be hounded. You deserve to be sidelined. How can self-determination be a use for alienation? I don't understand that.
I want to take the same question to Dr. Syeda, who is a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist who joins us right now, who's also wearing the headscarf. Would you be comfortable sharing your personal story with us, your personal relationship with the hijab?
Oh yeah, definitely. I talk about it. It's somewhere on the internet as well. By now, everything's on the internet. So I started wearing hijab when I was 17, 18 years of age. I was the only hijabi on my medical college campus at that time. There was no discussion or dialogue around hijab ever before in my family and on an everyday lifestyle. It was like, yeah, that's a good thing to do. And I decided it, I took it, and I thought it was something that I want to do. It's a good thing for me to do. In a very, like, at 17, I'm in a very naive way and everything, but that was my choice and I was happy to do it. And I have since then, alhamdulillah, continued to practice it. Hasn't hindered me anywhere, hasn't hindered anything, hasn't allowed me, has not allowed me not to make friends or not to have a life or not to party or socialize or any of that sort. I mean, I'm a specialist in a medical field. I think that's endorsement enough, isn't it? So clearly it doesn't hinder me in any way. And also I think, when I have that this is my choice and this is okay and everybody else is also okay with it, at that age, at 17, 18 years of age, is very important. Because yes, as a grown person, as an independent woman, I might be a little bit more comfortable taking my own decisions. But you understand, for a young person in school and college and even early adulthood, we're not as confident, right? And when we're talking about women, whether we're talking about from a health perspective or social perspective, when we're talking about injustice and inequalities, we should talk about removing barriers instead of creating more barriers for them. I don't want to be objectified. I don't want to be looked up and down and said that you should cover up or you should not cover up. So I don't like that. Why would anybody like that? Especially any other woman would like that. So for you to tell me what I should wear and should not wear, apart from my constitutional rights and everything, I feel that's just a direct attack on me. And don't I have enough on my plate to do and to worry about or to live or to achieve than to worry about your opinion? And
so we have, if I may, forgive me for interrupting you. So one person on the chat window has said, you are privileged.
yes.
As a woman, you cannot be the voice of the oppressed hijabi.
I don't think I was the voice of the oppressed hijabi. Both, Maryam and I spoke about, because you asked about our stories, we talked about stories. But again, when you want to empower women to make their choices, how are you going to empower them by taking away some of their power? That doesn't seem logical to me at all.
Precisely, and I think that's the argument, right?
And that's what I want to bring to you, Ms. Nundy. Now that we've heard both of these, you tell us it's not about essential, practices of being Muslim. It's about your personal identity, your expression of your religious freedom. Where is the legal argument there? How would you frame that argument?
I don't need to. The Supreme Court has already. In Bijoy Emanuel, the first part of Article 25 is what was considered. And they said that the question is not whether a particular religious belief or practice appeals to our reason or sentiment, but whether the belief is genuinely and conscientiously held as part of the professional practice of religion, right? And here was someone who was not wanting to sing the national anthem. Right?
Even though the Kerala High Court had said that there's nothing in the national anthem to offend your religious sensibilities, the Supreme Court decided to do away with that argument.
Now, the thing is that when you look at this judgment, there is absolutely no reason that I think that a stay should not have been given. I think a stay very much should have been given based just on this. Also, when you look at the law that seeks to limit this, it's very broad. It says it's furthering secularism, etc. Now, Indian secularism has always been looking at all religions rather than looking at none. But I wanted to speak to a point that Dr. Syeda had mentioned with regard to what is popularly known as false consciousness, right? The argument of false consciousness, that you don't really know that you're disempowered. This is why you wear heels, which are really bad for your back. This is why you wear bikinis that, if you're not comfortable with them. And this is why you wear a hijab, or this is why you wear a niqab, right? This is the false consciousness argument is thrown at all of these things by feminists and by many others. I think the problem here is this, is that even if you took that to be true, even if you said, and I think the niqab is a very, very different thing from the hijab, right? And let us also be clear that a dupatta, if you took a dupatta off of a woman and said that even though it's white, say, and your uniform is white, you cannot wear the dupatta. And if you're going to stop, if you're in rural Bihar or somewhere there where you are not going to be allowed to go to school without that dupatta, say it's a co-ed institution, right? Mm. Bad luck, and you're out.
Yeah.
The same principle applies. And if you are saying, and interestingly, Ms. D'Souza, the Karnataka Education Act actually speaks about fostering something, this language is something like fostering secularism through education, the goal, the objects and reasons, right? If you're going to bar people from education, how are you going to foster the secularism that you speak of? And if you're looking at empowering Muslim women, is sending them home 2 months before the exam the way you wish to do it?
Also, I want to point out that yesterday, before the government decided to close the schools and colleges for 3 days, the girls who were standing outside were brought into a separate classroom. They were seated separately from their classmates. They were not given lessons through the day because they were told, if you want to attend your lessons, you'll have to take off your hijab. They refused. They said, fine, you sit here all day without your classes. I mean, where is their right to equality at this point? That by itself is traumatic enough, on that decision, Ms. Nandan.
No, I think it's terrible. And I think it's the fact that, and there's some reportage saying that the teachers and I don't know how correct it is, but there is reportage saying that the teachers were not, in fact, saying anything to the men wearing the saffron scarves that looked entirely identical, looked like they'd been distributed by a political party. One guess as to which one. And were saying to the hijabi students that you can't enter. So,
there were videos.
There
were videos that did the rounds that showed very clearly Vishwa Hindu Parishad and Bajrang Dal local leaders instructing these young people in their saffron scarves, telling them what to do, where to go, what to say to the principal, what sort of slogans, and actually saying, we're standing outside the gate, we're here to support you, don't worry, you go ahead and do this. But, what I want to address, and I mean, that's politics, unfortunately, but what I want to address here, and I'll take this back to Maryam, is there a false equivalency being built here saying that, then, Hindu students will come with a tilak, or they'll come with a saffron scarf, or they'll do something else, and why is this allowed and that not allowed? What is your response to those arguments?
See, obviously, the false equivalence has always been there, because at the heart of it, if you see that these are protests against protests, you are protesting against somebody's right to wear something. Make it make sense. I am protesting because it's my agency. You are protesting because you're telling me it's not my agency.
Yeah.
Right? So, and see, protection of public order is something that is being thrown around a lot. And you're saying that, by wearing this, you're causing so many protests and everything, and public order is being disturbed. Which is why I kept on saying, why is the state government blowing hot and cold? They were wearing everything. There was no protest. Women everywhere have been exercising their choice. There have been no widespread protests until this day. women have been fighting their private battles for whom it means a patriarchal construct, for whom they feel that it restricts them, that it doesn't define them, whatever. But there has been no protest against my right to wear something by putting on threatening symbols, by saying threatening slogans. And I'm from UP. I grew up in the shadow of the Babri Masjid demolition. What that means to me is not something everybody will realize. And I think that sentiment needs to be protected. So, if you see that that one girl who came to submit her project and the bravery that she is expected to show, are we saying that, listen, if you want to participate in the curriculum, you're expected to have that standard of bravery and fearlessness every day? And can we guarantee them protection all the time?
So to add to that, do you have more, Maryam?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
To add to what Maryam just said, what's happening, and she said it so eloquently. I mean, she said, you're right, you're protesting against my wearing something, right? But what it is really privileging the heckler's veto. And it's not any lawyer will tell you that public order is not harmed by someone even advocating, say, for something like independent state for Kashmir. That does not disturb public order if you look at the Shreya Singhal judgment, right? Mere wearing of a hijab can in no manner disturb public order. The part of that section 133 is equality of dress, that bizarrely sort of phrased equality of dress part, right? 133.2. I mean, I suppose that's the part that is probably relevant. But what is happening here, the reason that it is so appalling is that you're citing public order when the precise thing you're doing is you're failing to stem the heckler's veto. These people are hecklers. And they cannot be, and there were, honestly, the Bajrang Dal should really be declared a terrorist organization, as I have said, on many platforms for many years, right? And for them to now come and demonstrate and say, take your headscarf off, otherwise you will be denied education. And for that to be, it's effectively privileged, because let's be clear that the springing up of the government order and the Karnataka Education Act is not independent of the Hindutva ecosystem.
I have to respond to a couple of things. There are a bunch of people on the chat window who are calling me biased and saying I have an agenda because I've invited Muslim women to comment on a subject.
Too bad.
About Muslim women. Gosh. And somebody else, just me trying to make friends with Muslims. Well, I have a lot of Muslim friends, so I'll take that. I'm not arguing with that. But I just want to point out that I don't do debates on this channel. I don't have two people pit them against each other and have them yell at each other.
Oh, thank God.
There are crores of rupees invested into television channels that do that. Feel free to go watch that. What we're doing here is we've got 3 professionally qualified individuals who are giving us their opinion in a calm manner. They're not being interrupted. The idea here is for you to be able to hear their points of view so that you can make up your mind on how you feel about the subject. That's what we're trying to do. We're making space for these opinions and these points of view, so you get to hear them out. If you don't like it, go watch something else, guys. This internet is full of content. Don't worry. I want to take this back to Dr. Syeda here. And there's a lot of argument coming in, even on our chat window, saying that, all of this personal expression is fine as adults, but when you're in school uniform, there has to be uniformity. How do we reconcile what we've said so far with what should be allowed in the classroom?
So nobody's saying that they shouldn't be uniform. Just make a uniform that's acceptable for a Sikh boy with a turban and a Muslim woman with a hijab. That's perfectly acceptable, isn't it? And the girls that I saw on those photographs and videos were wearing the uniform colors in their hijab. They weren't blingy or something else or something out there, isn't it? So that argument doesn't make me understand. As mental health professionals and psychiatrists across our country, we are fighting for integrated and inclusive education systems where we are talking about children with learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy. They all must go to a same school with whatever it is that they need to be able to achieve their health and life goals. And so when we can talk about including people with different, whether that's neurodivergent requirements or physical requirements, why are we then also saying that segregating this further? Don't we want that kind of education for our children to like recognize that everybody is different? You don't have to compete with anybody. You still be you. You are still, or you need to, be okay being you. Like we know these popular phrases, be you. But that's what we are trying to achieve as educationists as well as mental health professionals. From somebody who's involved with school mental health and college mental health, is very disturbing to me. If there was a protest and those girls were protesting against the administrative or the management or everything, why was that narrative then even allowed to pit students against students? Instead, in the meantime, when they were trying to make up all of these things, why weren't there discussions and mental health professionals on the ground, doing exercises in terms of how to even have an opinion of yourself, or how to, express your opinions or differences, and how not to bully, and why wasn't all of that happening? Don't we care about our children? Don't we care about the children who are going to those schools and colleges, and the other children who are watching all of this? Oh, so I mean, it's alarming, the lack of care we are showing to these children, and not just the hijabi women. And of course, the hijabi women, girls are fighting there and fighting for their rights. And yes, I am privileged. I tell people all the time, I am very privileged. Having said that, I am still going to, because I know I'm privileged, I'm going to try and see that even if I'm talking about only from Muslim women's point of view and not just every child's point of view, that I need to make it easy for them to be privileged enough to make these decisions on their own. And I can't do that unless and until I tell them it's okay for you to look like me and achieve everything that you want to achieve. So, and you can't tell children what to do. You have to do it and show it to them, isn't it? Modeling is something that's how they are going to learn. So again, this whole thing about appeasing somebody or the other. No, it's about, we want to tell our children that everybody's different and everybody's equal. You get to be you. We want you to be you. We want you to be happy being you. We want you to reach out to people if you don't think that you're happy, or if you think you're unhappy. Do you know the suicide rate in students in India? That's really alarming. And do you think all of this is going to help that rate? Suicide is the most preventable death out there. And what are we doing instead of helping decrease that suicide rate? Are we not actually, in fact, increasing it?
I want to say something to the men on the chat window and the men generally in the country who are weighing in so heavily on what these girls should and should not wear. As a woman myself, right, there are grades to comfort. Some women are completely comfortable wearing shorts and walking down the street, and some are not. I was not, for example. I didn't feel comfortable wearing shorts. I never did. I would always wear full jeans. And if you told me that from tomorrow you have to wear shorts, I wouldn't be able to do it because it was just not something I was comfortable with. I just grew up like that. Some women are comfortable. It took me years to get comfortable to wear a swimsuit to go to the pool and learn how to swim. I was just not comfortable doing it because it was not something that it was easy for me. There are different layers of comfort with our clothes, expression with our clothes that we have as women. And it's layered in many things: how people look at us, how we feel about ourselves, how positive we are about our body, how we want to express our religion, how we want to express our individuality, how much makeup we want to wear, what we want to do with our hair. The length of our hair is also something society comments on. these are really also extremely difficult waters to navigate as a young person, 16, 17, 18, which is the age group that we're actually talking about for these young girls. So it's fine to think that as men, you can constantly say, oh, I think this girl is oppressed and I think this girl is not oppressed, but it's really not up to you. Especially that one girl from Mandya who came in on her two-wheeler, parked it and walked into the campus by herself, who's not intimidated by those 40 men who were screaming at her. She did not look oppressed by any stretch of imagination. She looked extremely individualistic and extremely strong. But I want to take one thing that's bothering me back to Ms. Karuna Nundy. Ms. Nundy, you argued Article 14 and the right against these arbitrary changes of rules. If that argument were to be accepted, would that mean that, like the Madhya Pradesh Home Minister or the Education Minister in Madhya Pradesh said, that as long as the school declares it in the beginning of the year, it's no longer arbitrary? So a school or a college could say in the beginning of the year, hijab not allowed, and now it's part of the rules, so there's nothing one can do.
No, because that is a very important interim order argument, the Article 14 argument, right? Because it's arbitrary and you can't do it now. On the larger question and the merits of the issue, I think you have to argue the Article 25 point, and you have to be able to say that at the very least, that whether or not it is an essential practice and part of the religion, that it is something that is due to you because of your freedom of conscience. Now, the reason that a lot of progressive lawyers aren't entirely comfortable with this, right, is because, of course, it does then open the door to, given that religion has become so polarized and it has sort of burgeoned all over our country in a sort of much more strident and political form, and I can see how as part, those who aren't part of the sort of majoritarianism, and which can frequently become bullying, that one would want to say, actually, this is my identity, live with it, deal with it, right? And may want to take on the hijab as a political act as well as perhaps a spiritual act, right? But the thing is that, of course, it does open the door for others to come in and say that, look, I truly believe that I want to be wearing my sindoor and my Mangal Sutra and my chudas after my wedding, and I don't deny me education, right? So as a society, we have to be okay with that, right? Because those chudas and that Mangal Sutra and that sindoor is not disturbing anyone as much as the hijab is not disturbing anyone, right? In addition, I think stepping away from women, because why is it all about what women wear, for God's sake, those words were intentionally chosen. But, you have men coming in with tikas and say that I truly believe this and I want to. And there are people who, in part because of the new media environment,
Yes.
and all these very aggressive Hanuman stickers on cars, right? Even as part of that, want to wear tikas and feel this is who I am, right? Plus, there's a huge rate of unemployment. This is the identity. So if those fellows then come into the education institutes in their tikas, it does, we have to face it, open the door to that. I do want to say, though, that there is an illusion in the French idea of laïcité and not having religion in the public sphere, that the public sphere is culturally and religious neutral, and it's not. The dominant culture in the public sphere in France, for instance, is the default Judeo-Christian culture where it is right now, right? So culture is not neutral. Dupattas aren't even thought of in this context, but I think dupattas are a very good example, right? Because what the Quranic verse also said is it speaks of a head covering. So if you had something, just a dupatta covering your head, right? It's that same dupatta, which is some institutions will be allowed. Are you going to say you can't wear the dupatta over your head, right?
We've had, we've had some interesting arguments pop up on our chat window, some of which I will read out, some of which I will not. But at the end of the day, guys, I think that if we go back, and the thing that worries me most of all here, and I'll take this to Dr. Syeda because she's the psychiatrist on this panel. When I was at that age, or when we were all in school, it was drummed into our head unity and diversity. Ek titli, anek titliyan. Doordarshan would spend like a certain amount of time every night telling us that we are one, but we are still different. Which is what Indian secularism is about, that we are all different, but there is something that brings us together. The messaging that we're sending out right now, which is that you cannot be different. You have to all be similar, or you have to all be same. Equality and similarity are not the same thing. Equality is that you are treated the same before the law, in spite of the fact that you are different, celebrating the fact that you are different. So there's, I think that the messaging we send out to young people today is very dangerous. Instead of teaching them what we actually stand for, we're teaching them the opposite. Dr. Syeda, what is that likely to do? Because these are the young people who will grow up into adults who will think that in our country, everybody should be cookie cutter same.
So when we take away individuality from a person, you are hampering the development of the brain as well as the mind and all of its expressions, where you're going to hamper that person's IQ, you're going to hamper that person's social skills, you're going to hamper creativity. So you're going to hamper all functions of the mind and the brain. When you're telling people that you can't do what you might have an idea in. So a simple thing, when you're growing up and how your brain actually develops in a very, very overly simplistic way is if I have a question, that means there is a neural circuit that's kind of about to be built. And if I get the answer immediately, that circuit is then built. And then that's like, that gives my brain the power to kind of makes it more powerful in that sense. So when I'm told that, no, don't ask, don't question, don't learn, can you imagine what those circuits are going to go through? And then if I have lesser number of circuits, or like I said, a completely oversimplistic way of looking at it, how do you think that's going to translate into a human development in its own, like just the societal development also, isn't it? We're going to stop innovating, we're going to stop being creative, we're definitely going to stop being happy. We're going to, walk around like droid clones of our human selves, isn't it? So that is an alarming kind of way of looking at it and thinking. And, banning something is never the solution. We know from a scientific point of view that banning anything, even an illegal substance, is not an answer to harm reduction or to damage reduction of that sort. So when we are looking at empirical data, and if we don't want to follow that empirical data, we are going to unfortunately face the consequences and results of that in a very harmful manner. We're essentially allowing, we're making our generations and generations into unhealthy, unproductive, uncreative human beings, which is not something we owe better to our next generation not to do this.
I have to wrap up here, but I just want to offer one piece, my 2 pence here, which is simply this. There are many, many people arguing that this is oppressive and they are in some way empowering these young girls by banning their hijab. There cannot be a bigger hypocrisy than that, because what you're doing effectively is denying them an education. There is scores and scores of reports and data on this country that tells us that when young girls are educated, it is a silver bullet solution for most of the problems our country faces. The birth rate population comes down, the family's earning goes up, children are better spaced out and they're better fed because their mother has access to decision, she has access to agency over her body, she delays her own wedding date, she puts herself in a better position, she's able to financially support herself. Giving girls an education should be our single-minded priority at this point as a country. What we're doing is the opposite of that. So if you're arguing in any way that you're doing this to empower these young women, you are a fool who does not read enough. You need to read more. And there is no other way to put it, maybe translate it into other languages to help you understand it better. Telling someone to take off a piece of clothing is never empowering. Try it yourself. So none of these arguments hold true. There is enough data. We have enough stuff to read in this country. For heaven's sake, pick something up and read it. In the meantime, I want to thank my panelists for sharing their opinion, for sharing their personal stories and being so frank and forthcoming with and generous with their time. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. For our audience, you've been a great audience. Thank you for your questions and the jabs. They're always welcome. The news is up at exactly 9 o'clock. Take a look at that as well. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.